The Canadian garbage at the center of a dispute with the Philippines will soon be coming home. The cost? More than $1 million. Environment Minister Catherine McKenna announced that the government has awarded a contract to Bolloré Logistics Canada to remove the garbage by the end of June. According to the tender, it will cost at least $1.14 million to do so. So how did Canada land in this predicament in the first place? The fight dates back to 2013 and 2014. 103 containers were shipped from Canada to Manila, Philippines. The contents were supposed to be recyclable plastics, but upon opening them, locals found an estimated 2,500 tons of household trash, including kitchen waste and used diapers.
We are not a garbage dump of any country, and Canada should recognize that.
Prime Minister Stephen Harper faced calls to take back the trash, but his government called it a, quote, private commercial matter. In 2015, Justin Trudeau made one of his first trips as Prime Minister to Manila. He arrived to screaming fans, but also to questions about why Canada hadn't collected what it dumped there.
I believe there are loopholes here that were allowed to be skirted that we need to make sure we close, both for Canada's interests and for good relationships with our neighbours.
In 2016, a Filipino court ordered Canada to take back the trash, and the Liberal government has said since then that it's working on it.
We also discussed the garbage issue, which I know has been a long-standing irritant, and I committed to him, as I'm happy to commit to you all now, that Canada is very much engaged in finding a solution on that.
But frustration in the Philippines has clearly reached a boiling point, with President Rodrigo Duterte threatening war against Canada if it doesn't clean up its mess immediately.
Loaded the containers to a ship and I will advise Canada that your garbage is on the way. Prepare a grand reception. Eat it if you want to.
It will not be eaten. Minister McKenna's office says the garbage will be treated to meet Canadian safety and health requirements and will be disposed of by the end of this summer. Over to the power panel, of course, with Marg, Amanda, Tim, and Chris. Chris, I'm going to start with you because you were in the Philippines for back when the Prime Minister made that first trip. Yeah,
and he talked about it as being a legal issue. The loophole, you heard him describe it. The Canadian government didn't have the power necessarily to enforce a commercial contract and make them take it back, and the company was bankrupt anyway. Look, a couple of things that I think are worth taking away from this. One is that for Duterte, this is a big win, and somehow he's come out looking like the good guy and Canada the bad guy. This is clearly an issue that should have been dealt with before. I don't understand necessarily the logistics behind all of it, of taking back 60, I think, or 60 some of these containers left. But anyway, it's taken too long. Clearly, it's now 4 years or 3.5 years since he made that promise. He talked about it again in 2017. So now it appears that because of yet another threat, we're going to take it, with Duterte saying we're going to send it by ship and dump it in Canadian territorial waters, that suddenly we now have a contract in place and are ready to take it. So there you have it. It's an international kind of blemish on Canada's reputation. It's really hard to see how you can lecture others about things like the environment when you have your trash sitting across the ocean somewhere.
That's true. I would also point to some hypocrisy on the part of Duterte, who, looks like a good guy in this and certainly used this to nationalize support around midterm elections, which happened last week, I believe. He isn't exactly the hero of most stories, though, to be fair. Amanda, what do you think?
Well, yeah, and despite the fact that this was
I'm not saying that
originally, obviously, a private matter, and that's why the Harper government, I think, refused to deal with it at the time that it happened. Now we're many years later, and it becomes a public matter because we have the threat from the Philippines of actually dumping all this garbage in our waters, or the equivalent of all this garbage in our waters. So obviously, the federal government, who had made the promise to clean it up, was forced to really, put the gas on it and make sure that that trash was brought over immediately. And I think some people really look at the price tag of a contract like this and they say, $1 million that go to bringing this trash back. But I think the alternative, the idea that trash of that magnitude could be dumped in our water, obviously is not a palatable alternative. So this was the right thing to do. We have to remove the garbage. We have to take care of our mess.
Could it have been a bit cheaper, though, perhaps, if the government had acted as quickly as it initially promised to do something about it?
It was tendered, so you would imagine that, the best contract was awarded at the best price. But at the end of the day, nobody's going to gamble with the idea that trash like that is going to end up in our water. We have to pay the price for it.
Of course, I'm saying basically, Tim, that they had promised, like Chris mentioned, back in 2015 to do something about it.
But Vashi, you're rummaging through the trash now of the
I knew
past,
it.
and
I
it's
knew it.
just not easy. What, the two of you didn't do anything? Like, how can we talk about this seriously? I mean, Duarte's kind of like Oscar the Grouch over there. He's come out of the trash can, and he wants somebody to take the trash that's rummaging around away. I mean, this is a silly story. It is embarrassing to Canada. I'm surprised that Duarte didn't encourage the Prime Minister to get into the ring with Manny Pacquiao, the Filipino boxing champion, and change the story into great dynamics. I mean, it's I don't know. How does this happen? What does it mean, Vashi? I don't know. I don't have a clue. I failed you today. This is just awful.
Thank you. Mark, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I'm surprised it took so long, and it just seems to have festered and festered. I'd be curious to see what they're going to do in future to prevent this from happening, because, as was mentioned, the company involved no longer exists. And, we see a version of this here in Alberta with liability management on, orphan wells and that kind of thing. And I think it's incumbent on the government to, yes, clean up the mess and deal with it. Should have been done sooner, but also what are they going to do in future to prevent this? Because even though it was a private company, at the end of the day, the government and we as taxpayers end up paying for the cleanup.
Well, it was supposed to be recyclable plastics and those sorts of things, not
Diapers
garbage that was going to rot for 4 years. But I go back to my point. Canada has tried to take a very principled stand on the international stage around environmental issues, and yet has taken 4 years and suddenly was able to let a contract and now announce that it's being this garbage is coming back when threatened again by this strong-arm dictator of Philip. I shouldn't call him a dictator, he's like, but this guy who deserves no sympathy out of all of this. So it's coming back. It will be disposed of properly. And to Mark's point, it is interesting. There is an international convention about sending your garbage to developing countries. I think Canada and other countries are going to have to look very closely at what commercial contractors do to ensure that what they say they are shipping someplace is, in fact, what they are shipping someplace.
Yeah, and the point about liability is interesting, too. And the example around orphan wells is an interesting one. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's certainly, what do you do when the company goes bankrupt, right?
You just shut the lid on it all there, didn't you, Vashi? Well done.
Yeah, we're just gonna close the lid and throw out the trash on this right now. Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much to the Power panel. Thanks to Tim Powers, Amanda Alvaro, Mark McQuaig-Boyd, and Chris Hall. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.